As I noted in my last video, my experiment in growing Seminole pumpkins this year is a bust. In spite of a bed absolutely overflowing with foliage, fruit production was underwhelming to say the least. There could be a number of reasons for this, but my suspicion is overcrowding. Back in May, I transplanted 6 starts into the bed, which subsequently started looking pretty sickly. To compensate for what I assumed would be a bunch of dead plants, I direct sowed another 6 plants in the bed. Much to my surprise, the initial 6 plants rallied and thrived, as did the plants I seeded directly. Instead of thinning the plants, I let it all ride, hoping if I fertilized enough, I would end up with 12 highly productive Seminole pumpkin plants and more winter squash than I would know what to do with. What happened is most fruits withered up and dropped off before they reached the size of a grape. Only 2 fruits developed to a point where I was confident they would fully mature. As I don't have an overabundance of space in my backyard garden, I made the call to pull the plug on the Seminole pumpkins and grow something else in their place. I know I want a bigger reserve of winter squash than I'm likely to get from my other varieties currently in the garden, but is there still time to grow more? The answer is probably. The replacement squash I selected are a bush variety butternut squash from Burpee called Butterbush. Not only are these excellent table fare, they have an astonishingly quick yield time of as little as 75 days, though 90 days is honestly more typical in my experience. Sacramento is unlikely to see its first frost before the second half of November, so a round of these should have just enough time to bear fruit before what passes for our winter sets in. The first thing I'm going to do here is check the seeds for viability. I don't always do this, but this seed packet is a few years old and was left in my sweltering garage for the last few months. Before doing anything else, all I'm going to do here is kind of scuff the edges of the seeds with that little piece of triangular sandpaper you see in the top left. What this does is it makes it easier for the seed casing to release as the seedling emerges from the soil. I have had it happen before where the seed casing will stick to the cotyledons and just not really ever fully release, and it will either stunt the plant, stress it, or in some cases outright kill it. So I find that doing this, just a little light scuffing around the edges of the seed. You don't want to go too deep, or otherwise you can compromise the seed itself and kill it before it has a chance to grow. But just a real light little scratching across any abrasive surface, sandpaper, emery board, nail file, will really help those seed casings to release as the plant pokes through the surface of the soil. The next thing I'm going to do is wrap the seeds in a damp paper towel and place it in that plastic bag. Uh, the paper towel should be just barely wet. You don't want anything sopping wet that's going to cause any kind of rot issues. So a wrung out paper towel folded up over these seeds is going to be plenty sufficient. Once everything's bagged up here, I'm going to leave the whole thing in a warm but not hot place for, I don't know, 2 to 3 days, and that's when I'm going to start checking it. The idea is to get the seeds just as the initial root just starts to emerge, so you don't have to worry about breaking them off as you plant them. This way I can check to see if those seeds are even viable before I bother putting them into starter pots. All right, it's 4 days later, and as you can see, we have 100% germination on our squash seeds. Some of the rootlets are a little longer than I would like. They might be a little delicate when planting, so I'm going to have to be extra careful. I don't think it's going to be a real problem, though. I am using peat pots to start these, even though I'm not a giant fan of peat pots. The way they hang on to moisture can sometimes lead to mold issues. And while they're touted as being biodegradable, it takes them a really long time to actually break down in the environment. I have been digging up peat pots in my compost pile that are years old and are still 100% there. But the problem is winter squash and all squash are very sensitive to root disturbance. So transplanting them in the same manner that you would with, say, a tomato, where you slide it out of a plastic cup, pop it in the ground, no problem. Often that leads to severe transplant shock for squash, pumpkins, cucumbers, all of those cucurbits. So what I did here is kind of a Hail Mary experiment. I put some slits in the sides of the pot here, the idea being that as the root ball grows after I put it in the ground, the roots will be able to kind of more easily escape the pot, whereas an uncompromised pot, they actually have to grow through the very dense peat material. We'll see how that goes. So all I'm going to do here is start making little holes. I'm putting them so, I'm giving them, I don't know, about a half an inch of depth. And I'm going to just very carefully start placing the seeds under the soil and then very gently close it up. And that's all there is to it. And then we'll just have to do this another, I don't know, 8 or 9 times. Give them a initial watering, and then we should be good to go. Let's see how it goes. All right, well, those started squash are cooking. It is now time to clear out the bed that I'm going to use of all of those lovely, luscious Seminole pumpkin plants that never actually bore fruit. So I'm going to do that. And wow, seeing yourself in profile really is a wake up call. I think that I clearly need to stop eating so many homegrown potatoes and start eating more homegrown greens. All right, let's speed this up a bit and get this bed cleared out. And yep, I am still fat in time lapse. Unfortunately, time lapse just speeds playback. It does not speed up your metabolism. But anyway, what it does do is it makes about a half hour worth of work look like it went really fast, getting rid of the existing plants, taking down my rope trellis, just in general, kind of making the space feel a lot cleaner and clearer. It's always nice to declutter, even if you're tearing up plants you spend a lot of resources growing. This bed is definitely going to have to be amended with compost, as it had 10 to 12 heavy feeding squash plants in it for most of the summer. Unfortunately, this means I'm going to have to first remove my layer of wood mulch. Wood mulch is great on the garden bed, but it's not so great in the garden bed. Churned in, it can actually tie up nitrogen while it breaks down. So I'm getting that out of the way here. And here are the two lonely Seminole pumpkin fruits that actually made it to almost maturity. A little bit of a disappointment, but that is the nature of gardening. Not everything is going to work out. I'm actually going to leave these off the vine and see if they ripen up. Now it's time to get the bed ready to amend with compost. The approach I'm going to take here is a play on core gardening, which involves actually burying compost in your garden bed. All I have on hand is partially finished compost. I'm not too worried about that. It's not as far along as it really should be, but squashes and pumpkins, they tend to do really well in unfinished compost. I'm surprised as I do this at how compacted and hard the soil in this bed has become. Um, I'm actually struggling here with to dig the trenches I want with just the shovel alone. I'm probably going to have to spend significant time this winter really amending this bed to soften this soil up a little bit. Eventually, I put the shovel down and broke out the pickaxe to really break up this hard soil. Made things, go along way quicker, a lot easier. So here I am. I'm just kind of digging it out away from one side of the bed and dumping in my buckets of compost, and then churning a little bit, and then filling back over it. I don't know how many people do something similar. I know that no dig, no till is really the in thing, but sometimes I find that actually really working a good amount of compost into and under the soil layer is really helpful. All right, next I'm just going to water everything in a little bit. I want to make sure that everything stays damp enough to facilitate all of the biological activity that should keep going on to make for healthy, fertile soil. Once I'm done watering this in, I'm going to cover the surface of the soil with a layer of cardboard. The purpose of this, of course, is to keep the sun from parching everything to death while we wait for the plants to get to a point where we can actually put them in the garden bed. All right, we're now about 10 days post germination, and everything's looking really healthy. For the most part, the first true leaves are well on their way to forming. In fact, they've emerged, they're just small. So, my idea today was I was going to start acclimating these guys to the outdoor conditions. I was going to set them out for about an hour or so in the real sun, filtered through the shade cloth to kind of break them into, the warm climate, and then, take them back inside before the worst heat of the day. However, I noticed a potential issue in I didn't anticipate. Let me see if I can show you here. All right, the roots are already starting to grow through the peat pot. My concern is, and perhaps it's an unwarranted concern, is that um, an air pruning effect is going to occur that is going to, when roots are exposed to air, they'll stop growing sometimes, and that will stunt the overall growth of the plant. I really don't want that. I can't, unfortunately, I just can't toss these in the ground just yet. We're in the middle of a 3 to 4 day triple digit heat wave, and that's just not the ideal conditions for transplanting. And I also want to give these guys a few days to get used to the real natural outdoor conditions. So I'm going to toss a little bit of a Hail Mary here. I am going to take some cling wrap. That's upside down, doesn't matter. I'm just going to take some cling wrap, wrap it around the outside of the peat pot to hopefully, keep the air off the roots for another couple of days until conditions are more conducive to transplanting. I'm going to do that off camera just because it's kind of hard. I'm recording on my iPad, and it's kind of hard to work around everything here in a way that, would still be even mildly interesting to look at. So I'm going to get that done, and then starting tomorrow, I'm going to put these guys out in the real sunshine for a few hours. All right, now I finally have these out getting some real sun, albeit sun filtered by the shade cloth, trying to get them acclimated to outdoor conditions. It's supposed to be really, really hot today on the day as I'm filming this segment. Calling for 105, and it's been uncharacteristically humid. It's been absolutely miserable. Not a fan. I can do the dry heat to a degree, but hot and humid, just not used to it anymore. But anyway, so I'm going to keep an eye on the outdoor temp. Once it hits about 90, I'm going to pull these guys back inside, and I'm just going to keep doing this for the next few days. And then once we get a cooler day, I'm probably going to plan on an early evening planting. Once the sun's gone down a little bit and isn't quite so strong and brutal. All right, it's 2 days later. And these guys here, they just spent their first full day outside, and they're doing fine. So I'm going to risk it and put them in the ground. It's a good time to do it. We have some cloud cover that's going to be moving in as part of the remnants of a Hurricane Hillary, which is currently on its way into Southern California. We're supposed to get the very outer edge of it. If we get any rain at all, it'll be slight, but it will provide a little bit of filtered sunlight, which will be a good transition for these new starts, into full outdoor life. All right, I'm going to start digging holes. I just want to touch real quick on why I went through the trouble of starting these indoors when winter squash grow really fast from direct sow. And of course, the reason is the hot, dry conditions dry out the top layers of soil really fast. And the top layer of soil is where seeds are going to be. So I wanted to, give them get them a little further along in their life before tossing them out into the brutally hot and bright conditions we have around here. All right, these guys have now been outdoors for a little over 48 hours and no problems so far. No signs of transplant shock, no wilting, no yellowing, nothing like that. I did have to rig up an impromptu piece of shade cloth. The sun is now low enough in the southern sky. It was kind of peeking in around the edges of the shade cloth at the hottest part of the day. I just didn't want anything to shrivel up and burn away. I had 4 plants left over after seeding a more reasonable 5 plants in that last bed. So I replaced my Rio Grande tomatoes, which had pretty much quit production, with the remaining 4 Butterbush squash. I'm going to see how these will do. I'm kind of curious to see if they all make it, and if we're actually, for a change, harvesting winter squash closer to winter, which we we don't usually do here in the Sacramento Valley. We're usually harvesting them in July and August. So who knows? This could fail terribly. When I do my September garden walkthrough update, these could all be very dead. We will have to see.